Welcome to Blackland. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Like so many, I lost someone I loved to gun violence in my hometown of Harlem, New York. But not every bullet kills. Some just destroy and leaves the person alive. Emergency room doctors can tell you that. On this episode, we talked to two doctors from the very active Grady Hospital in Atlanta. One, an emergency room doctor. The other, a trauma surgeon, both on the battlefront of street violence. Two brilliant black lifesavers doing more than just patching up bullet holes. They're trying to stop the violence in the first place. But first, I talk with a gunshot victim. In my news career, I've interviewed a lot of victims of crime. People like Wesley Hamilton. He was shot. The bullet fractured his rib and severed his spine. You would be surprised how he turned around his life in the wheelchair, and at one point even meets and talks with the guy who put him in the chair.
The headlines always talk about black men being killed by gun violence, but no one talks about the survivors of the gun violence.
Now,
as a brown person, you just feel so invisible.
That's not fiction. Where we're from.
Brothers and sisters, I welcome you to this joyful day.
We celebrate freedom. Where we are.
Get on the ground!
I know someone heard something.
And where we're going.
We the people means all the people.
The Black Information Network presents Blackland with your host, Vanessa Tyler.
Yo, shots fired! Guys, shots fired, shots fired.
When a person is shot, they don't always die. A lot live with a lifelong injury. On this edition of Blackland, black bodies and one man's mission to build back better. Physical trainers love to say summer bodies are made in winter. The gym's perfect for the able-bodied to get in shape, but what if you're not? There are so many permanent spinal injuries on the streets.
Drop the gun! Why did you run from me?
I was scared.
So many will never walk again.
Yes, in the back, Sarge. I shot him.
The cop shot my plate.
Whether by cop or by black-on-black crime, many of those bullets land right in the back. For Wesley Hamilton, it was the latter. Senseless street crime sentenced him to life in the wheelchair.
I was shot in my abdomen 2 times, and that led to me having a spinal cord injury for the rest of my life.
Wesley Hamilton still wants to work out in a gym. Since not all gyms are for everybody, his mission is to change that.
Hey, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate this. And yes, let's chat.
Gyms for the disabled. Great idea. Talk about the need.
Yes. You know, when you think about wellness, everyone needs to be introduced to a healthier lifestyle. It brings longevity and it helps, you know, take care of just health complications. And when you think of people with disabilities, this is a large community of individuals that do deal with health complications, depending on what their injury is. But the wellness community has left these individuals out. And so for me, the need has always been there, but it's just time to raise awareness for people to see themselves in a community that they overlook.
How would these gyms look? Because, you know, we all have in mind that, you know, the different, you know, of course, weights and the different machines, but how would they look? Would they look the same?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, when you think about gym equipment, there's a lot of different variations of equipment, and most gyms sometimes just go with the same company. They go with some type of equipment that they think serves everybody. And to me, if people just kind of look and do their research on particular equipment, they will find out that there is equipment that doesn't change the aesthetic of the gym, but actually complements everybody.
Now, are you talking about gyms that would be exclusively or just gyms that would have equipment that could accommodate?
I'm just speaking from gyms, period, because when you think about even what I've done and created a model of a gym for individuals with disability, I did that because most gyms aren't ready to make themselves inclusive. My whole goal is that where I go work out, my family can too, right? Like that's how we look at inclusion. But when you go into a global gym, it lacks equipment that actually complements a disabled body. And most people might think it's a lot of different type of equipment, but it's really not.
I was just thinking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which kind of made things accessible. But they didn't do it for gyms, though.
Yeah, a lot of things. I feel like there's so many layers when you think of accessibility. And sometimes, especially back when the ADA Act was implemented, I don't think a lot of people was, thinking that individuals with disabilities will want to go into a gym or go into like the health and wellness area, especially back in the 70s and 80s. But as you've seen change in the last few years, especially with the pandemic, a lot of people started focusing on health. And that at the same time, when you see an individual with a disability working out, it's still an inspiring thing to society when it should be a normal thing to society.
Your organization, Disabled But Not Really, what's the mission there?
So the mission with Disabled But Not Really is to help individuals with physical disabilities find their identity after injury.
You're a Black man, and the way you became disabled is a way so many Black men are disabled. They're shot, usually in the back, either by police or equally tragic, by each other. Talk about that day. How long has it been, and when were you shot?
Absolutely. I was shot 11 years ago, January 14th, 2012. And it was after a verbal altercation with really just me and another like acquaintance, a female. And just like most situations, the person that shot me, I never really even had a conversation with. It was just, I can't speak for him on why he did it, but what I can say is that the energy that was in the space did create whatever that end result was. And for me, I was just a product of my environment. So I was shot in my abdomen 2 times, and that led to me having a spinal cord injury for the rest of my life.
So you were arguing with someone else, and this other person came on the scene.
Yep, absolutely. And the person that came on the scene was literally just trying to have, I guess, the person that was in the house trying to have their back, just literally looking out for them. And the only reason why I know this is because over time, after going through healing, I was able to meet the person that shot me.
It was a conversation years later captured on video and aired on Netflix Queer Eye. Wesley Hamilton speaking to the man who put him in the chair.
I don't want to go back and forth to make it like a, whose fault this was, whose fault that was. I don't want to do that. To give you some kind of clarity on my perspective of what happened, when I get there, I see your partner and your woman at the time or whatever like that arguing.
So I understand that my actions and my feelings and my emotions probably took the best of me that day. But it was still more or less like, why you?
I seen you bucking up to my cousin, you know what I'm saying? And he told me that you had a pistol. Your partner, I see his pistol. He got a 30-round magazine hanging out. And I seen him back and forth going, and I'm like, damn, all this over a bitch? That's when you started to come over towards me. You know how the streets are, I can't see years. In my mind, you got the pistol too. I'm like, man, look, I'm not going for that. I can't, risk me getting shot or getting, So what happened, happened.
It's crazy to hear it now. We live in a place where we all strapped and we don't care as long as we're trying to protect somebody that we love. I could understand why you did what you did. I was able to understand his reasoning of why this all transitioned. And it was basically just trying to protect somebody else that he knew.
Talk about the growing population of Black men paralyzed by bullet.
Yes, I feel like, the way I always say it is like, the headlines always talk about Black men being killed by gun violence, but no one talks about the survivors of the gun violence. And there's just a large number of individuals of color that have been victims to gun violence, men and women, unfortunately. And the number is rising because the gun violence has risen. And with that, again, everyone don't die. And because, being in a wheelchair and being a survivor of gun violence or a victim, depending on where you are in your story, that's just not represented enough. So we don't even sometimes realize how many people in our communities are, and have a disability due to some tragedy, because it's overlooked and not seen as much as other communities.
Most of us, working out is physical, but equally important, working out is mental. What does this do for you especially, and probably for others in this similar situation?
I think that our whole goal, even with my nonprofit, is to push people past their mental limits. We focus on physical fitness and nutrition, but the whole goal is, most people in society, no matter if you're disabled or not, there's something that you believe you can't do unless you've overcame that. But having a disability, most people don't think they can do too much anymore, especially if you acquired it later on in life. The only thing that you knew is how to be able-bodied. So what we do is we use the gym to help people push. And so it could be something as simple as, I don't think that I'm going to be able to transfer myself every day. Well, if we can get you to transfer, what happens is, yeah, you did something physically good, but mentally you've just overcame something even bigger. And that's, more or less is the way that we try to operate, is that within the disabled community, most people project that you're mentally defeated, you're dealing with all these things, but no one's giving you the ability to think that you're more, as much as they're like, oh man, you can't do this, you can't do that. Or even they think of themselves as can't do this or that. So mental is very important. And it's the way that we practice getting our mental health challenged and our mental perspective challenged. Because if we can challenge it, we can overcome it. And if we can overcome it, we can become whatever we want to be, no matter what limitations we have.
I think about those sporting events, and I mean, these guys are so physically fit. Their arms are strong.
The Americans have 3 very good shots at gold, including the defending Paralympic champion, Gianfranco Iannota, the 27-year-old from Garfield, New Jersey, who won this race in Rio. This year, he has raced the third.
Disabled but not really means just owning up to disability based off of society's perception. But everything that you become after that disability is so much more. And with society limiting so much of what you can do, you're disabled, but not really.
Wesley, many listeners already know you. Maybe they saw you on Good Morning America, where you got a $1 million donation. Talk about that surprise.
Well, as you referenced earlier, I am a Black man that was a survivor of gun violence, started this nonprofit organization, literally just wanting to help other people that look like me with the things that the tools that I use to get me to where I am today. And I say all of that because, receiving that award on Good Morning America, it was truly based off of someone watching this journey and believing in it enough to invest in it to grow more. And that's something that, to me, I will forever be grateful and indebted to them, because all I did was have a vision to change the perception that I once believed. And to know that someone could be able to see that in me and want me to do that for so many more people. Yeah, it's one of those heartfelt moments that I extend gratitude every day.
And many will get to know you with your appearance on the show Queer Eye, which is on Netflix. What will you be doing there?
Oh, yeah. So I definitely love being able to be on Queer Eye with Netflix, and this last season that will be out this year. I'm just coming back and using my tools and my mindset and the stuff that I do with Disabled But Not Really to help another individual in a wheelchair. The young man is a young Black man that has a very powerful story that many might sympathize from, but within the Black community, I think you could empathize from it. And his injury is something that, well, for me, I empathize through the whole thing. And so I get to come in and, assist this young man in trying to find purpose in life after something happens to him that has changed the trajectory of his life. I'm truly excited, and I hope everybody can check that out. I did have a first appearance with Queer Eye where they came in and did the same thing for me. It was in an earlier season, but within that, I was able to meet the person that shot me on that episode and tell them how grateful I was. So if you want to tap into either Queer Eye episode, I think both stories would be very powerful for anyone that watches it.
He's also given TEDx talks, taking his compelling life story on the road.
By a show of hands, how many of you can actually say you truly know who you are? And in fact, how many of you can say that you love everything about yourself? The reality is that it really took me to be in a wheelchair to find myself. And through the adversity and challenges that I face every day, helped me in that process.
And then you said, it took you being in a wheelchair to love yourself. Why?
Oh, yeah, that's so good. I think about being a product of my environment and not really having a visual representation of a Black man loving himself to the point he creates his own reality. So when I think, back to my accident and what has happened to me, I accepted that fate. I accepted being shot. I didn't know I was going to be paralyzed, but I accepted it. I didn't know anymore. That's not loving yourself to a point, that you can move forward or have hope. That was literally the mindset and how I saw myself. And so after being in a chair, everything just changed. I got healthier. I'm a single father. So, I feel like I became a better father, physically and mentally. Just my career, my life has changed in 11 years. And I love myself for that. And I don't think that none of it would have happened if I didn't start looking in a mirror and starting to be okay with the person I saw. And I had never took that approach in life before. So I think I ran the streets with a negative mindset because I never truly knew or loved the person that I was, because I didn't know who I was. And now I do know who I am. And I give all that thanks to being able to have my life change the way it did.
Before the shooting, you were pretty heavy. You were an overweight guy.
Yeah, I was like, it's I laugh about it, but I say within the Black community, it's because health and wellness isn't pushed the way it should be. We use the term big boned. And I was big boned, and I was big boned my whole life. I believe that I was big boned. There was no change in my size, and yeah, so yeah, I was big. I'm 5'4". I used to always try to give myself more inches in height so people wouldn't hear the 200 plus pounds, but I was definitely like 250 and I'm only 5'4". So
yeah. How can people connect with you? They want to follow and reach out?
People can go to disabled but not really. It sounds the same way it's spelled, and that's on all platforms. If you're looking just for me directly, you can go to I am Wes Hamilton, WES, and that's on all social media platforms as well.
Wow. Wesley Hamilton on a mission to open gyms for those with disabilities, and his advocacy organization, Disabled But Not Really. Thank you, Wesley, for your power.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Wesley Hamilton tells a story that's really common, but at least his story has a twist. Here's the common part: guns, bullets, sirens, just seconds between life and death. That's just a typical day at the office for Dr. Marie Selby and Dr. Randy Smith. You're both emergency room doctors at Grady. And for those of us who are not in Atlanta, they must hear that Grady is probably the preeminent trauma center. So Dr. Selby and Dr. Smith, welcome to Blackland on the Black Information Network. Would you both tell me, I'll start with you, Dr. Selby, first. You've heard Wesley's story, and you see the everyday aftermath of the gun war. Talk about what it's like for you the moment you clock in at the hospital.
Just for background, ladies and gentlemen, I'm an emergency physician hailing from New York and new to Atlanta. And, I'll start with, because his story was very impactful. And while we saw gun violence in New York, I was really traumatized myself with my experience here in Atlanta, Georgia, because when we talk about gun violence, it's on a whole different scale. I think a scale that's more reflective of what we see around the country as far as injury from firearms. And what really struck me with his story was the fact that I think a lot of, right, when we talk about injuries from violent injury in general, but especially from firearms, I think a lot of the conversation is centered around death, right? When we talk about these mass shootings, even if we talk about that, a lot of the times you'll talk about how many people were killed in those instances, but very few people talk about the injuries that people live with after, right? Which
permanent injuries, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Permanent injuries. We're talking about psychological injury, not just the physical. And then if we talk about, right, take that conversation to how that person's life is impacted, everything from their ability to make a living. We talk about their interpersonal relations, right? We're talking about a life that is significantly altered regardless, no matter how seemingly small the injury was. We're talking about that person's being on this earth being drastically changed for the rest of their life.
And Dr. Smith, those injuries usually that you see that you're in the operating room, those injuries are major. I mean, these are people coming in with multiple gunshots and survive. I mean, I think about 50 Cent. He was shot 9 times, but you're seeing what?
Yeah, so I'm a trauma surgeon. So like you said, I see people when they are in the trauma center, and I sometimes have to take them to the operating room. And it's true. I see the worst cases where multiple organs are damaged. Sometimes intestines are damaged and people have a colostomy bag, sometimes temporary and sometimes for life. And then I see some people who don't make it to the operating room either because their injuries are big or they're small. And I'll say that, what Dr. Selby was talking about, we know what happens to people when they expire. We have those numbers, but we don't have good data on how many people are actually impacted by injury. Firearm injury is pretty prevalent in our country. The latest estimates say that it's about 120,000 about there, that people who are injured each year. And that's just the individuals who are injured. We're not taking into account their nucleus, their support system, their families, their communities and neighborhoods. And so when you start to think about how much this problem has expanded, how many people are actually impacted, the number is quite extensive. And I'll tell you, from a trauma surgeon's perspective, it's quite tiring. My everyday is dealing with gunshot wounds and firearm injuries in some capacity, and trying to mitigate that from happening and trying to interrupt the cycle. And I will tell you that talking to family members and telling them that their loved ones have been injured by firearm injuries is the worst part of my job, and it's something that I have to do on a daily basis.
I was going to ask you about that because you both do have to deliver the news of whatever it may be, whether it's death or this person will never walk again. That's got to be, like you said, tough, Dr. Selby, when you turn around and they're waiting in the waiting room, and then here you show up with the news.
Yes, it's tough, and I think part of the conversation, right, is one thing that's sort of come to light, especially with COVID-19 and everything that happened after that, right? The fallout after that. One thing that's come to light lately is sort of providers' wellness and resiliency in the face of this, right? In the face of a crisis like that. So if we talk about, just as we talked about the challenges with COVID and how that impacted the care that we're able to deliver, you can make the same conversation or to have that same conversation when it comes to gun violence, right? Because I can tell you from experience and from also talking to my colleagues about how challenging it is to wake up and go into that each and every day, right? Having to break that news over and over again, having to see young men, young black men around the same age as myself, right? Dealing with my own mortality and seeing that happen over and over again, it is traumatizing. And, what I'm really afraid of is that at some point we might get to the point where there are no longer providers or enough providers to care for individuals. If we continue in this rate, right, over 120,000 injuries per year, as Dr. Smith said, right, we might be running up against a point where it becomes more difficult to provide under the best circumstances, right, us trying our best. We might not be able to live up to the standard of care we would like to provide because there's not enough people to do it because it's that difficult.
Because after you heal them, Dr. Smith, then they obviously are going to have multiple appointments. I mean, they're in the hospital at doctor's visits probably certainly every week, every other week after they are released from the hospital with multiple gunshots.
I'll tell you, some people do need to come back week after week, and sometimes they need to come just once. But the issue that we face is that there's so many barriers to just coming back for a follow-up appointment. And when you think about it, addressing gun violence, we really have to address the root causes that lead there, right? There are structural barriers, there are social determinants of health, financial issues, like poverty, homelessness, unemployment, lack of education. I mean, I can literally list all kinds of things, food insecurity. All these things are things that lead to or like risk factors for violent injury, but they also impede recovery. And so, yes, people do have to come back to the hospital for follow-up visits. But what we find is that those barriers that led to the injury are the same barriers that prevent them from coming back to their follow-up appointments. So what we need to do is start addressing the root causes and really invest in communities, invest in neighborhoods, invest in individuals, and not just put a Band-Aid on the physical injuries that we see.
Yeah, literally a Band-Aid on it. And that's something I guess that you're doing with your project, because if you're not busy enough, being a trauma surgeon in one of the busiest hospitals in the country, unfortunately for gun violence, you've also decided to go ahead on another mission. Talk about that.
Yes, just wanting to be a part of the solution and really address the root causes of violence. We started a hospital-based violence intervention program called the Ivy Project, and it stands for Interrupting Violence in Youth and Young Adults. And what it does is it brings people from the community who look like our patients, who speak the same language, who are trusted and respected by the community into the hospital to provide immediate care, love, support, and help with navigating the hospital. This is, remember, the worst time of someone's life. So to look up and see someone that looks like them that they can connect with is actually so helpful for their overall well-being and recovery. And what the violence intervention team does is they start to understand those root causes that we just talked about and all the things that we can do to interrupt the cycle of violence. We start pouring in resources to them in the hospital while they're here. And then we connect them to community partners outside of the hospital. And we really try to break down those risk factors, but then also lift up and leverage the protective factors as well. And we do this with community partners supporting us. We have a very strong network of folks here in the hospital. So Dr. Selby is one of the core faculty and has really been remarkable in trying to think outside the box of other therapeutic strategies like music therapy and the arts in order to try to provide an outlet for people. But we've been very successful with this because we are essentially like listening to the community, trying to understand what they need and then providing them what they need, not what we think they need, if that makes sense.
And it circles back to Wesley because boy, did he have a twist and a turnaround in life. He got into an argument with someone. He was shot, I believe, through the stomach, hit his spine, severed his vertebrae. And so he's permanently in the chair, life in the chair. But he took that and he decided to start an organization, Disabled Not Really. And he's on a mission to open gyms for people who are disabled. That's the good news. Are you seeing a lot of that as well as you people kind of changing and turning around their lives as a result? Frankly, he said the best thing that happened to him was being shot, which is an odd thing to say. Are you seeing that, Dr. Selby?
When we talk about, right, and what it really speaks to with Wesley is his resilience, right? But part of resilience is not just in the individual, which I know, right, just from hearing his story, the work that he's done, especially through the establishment of his organization, right? He has some personal characteristics of resilience, right? Of grit, if you want to call it that. But part of our individual resiliency lies in other folks, right? Support systems, our family, our friends, but also systems outside of our core network of individuals, right? Our communities, the communities that we live in. And so by having, right, resources in the community to address housing instability, food insecurity, to address lost wages, right, from a devastating injury like Wesley suffered, that's exactly what Dr. Smith is talking about, right? We're talking about building a system of resiliency or that fosters resiliency when individuals suffer injuries like that. That is something that we are seeing through the establishment of programs such as Ivy and other hospital-based violence intervention programs across the country. But I would like to take it one step further because there is a concept of community resiliency, right? Which could, when we have enough of it, we can prevent the injury in its entirety, right? Because when you start to address the issues that Dr. Smith mentioned that lead to violence, not only lead to an initial injury, but can lead to re-injury of patients. If we address those basic needs, as we said, food insecurity, making sure individuals have opportunities through education and access to employment. If we do that, we can prevent a lot of these injuries altogether. If we got individuals living in safer neighborhoods, right, and they don't need a firearm or don't think they need a firearm enough, one thing we don't often talk about is the number of injuries that are accidental. So accidental discharges of firearms, not just interpersonal violence, but we're talking about injury from cleaning your gun at home. Why do you have a gun? You feel unsafe in your neighborhood. Well, what if we created safer neighborhoods, right? Through addressing some of these social determinants of health or these basic needs, we wouldn't need guns in the first place.
I mean, people are really into guns in America, so I don't know.
True. But it's also addressing the culture, right? And there's a whole thing. We can talk ad nauseum about addressing basic stuff, even as what masculinity is, right? Yeah, this person stuffed my shoe or stuffed up, but my whole being as a man is not just, tied up in how my shoes look. We can redefine manhood, and that can help us deal with some of the issues that lead to violent injuries.
How many fights have been over somebody stepping on someone's sneakers? It's unbelievable. Dr. Smith?
No, I was just going to say that this just brings up a very good point, that the way that we frame this issue is so important. There's so much political divide and there's a lot of culture, and culture is very different geographically when you move around the US. But that's why we like to say that violence is a public health issue, right? We're talking about health and safety and well-being of individuals. We're not even focused really on gun control. We know that in areas where there's more gun and liberal gun laws, there are more injuries. But if we frame this as like, we're just trying to keep our kids safe. We're just trying to keep our grandparents safe, right? Because we see it all. We see people like children that come in, and we see 70-year-olds that come in. Like literally, this is impacting people across the lifespan. And I think we just need to frame it as such. This is a public health crisis. We want people to be safe, well, and whole.
And a lot of the people you see, of course, are people who are just victims of stray bullets. I mean, there's on a bus, they're in a car, and the bullets start flying. And we all know bullets have no names.
Correct.
Correct. Well, I have to thank you both for what you do. It isn't easy. You're saving lives, and you're also trying to prevent the injury in the first place. So, Godspeed with the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just know that there's strength in number, and we have each other. So that's what makes this all so great.
Dr. Selby, Dr. Smith, I'll let you get back. I'm sure it's time for you to get back to the emergency room because as we speak, I'm sure you're needed.
Thank you, Ms. Tyler.
Thank
Appreciate
you so much.
Thanks to those doctors who are on the front lines of life and death, saving lives of so many of us who are victims of gunshots. Gunshot violence plagues our streets in every Black community in every city in the country. The next time on Blackland, we're going to also continue in the vein of life and death, but this time it's about living. In the rural South with HIV, I talk with a Black woman who is on a mission to make sure people see her as not a victim, but a survivor and an advocate. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Join me next time on Blackland.